Hello, humans! As a longtime fan of animation, especially 2D animation, I am a big fan of Don Bluth. Here's a brief history lesson about this legend. He was a big fan of Walt Disney animation ever since he first saw Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs as a child and realized all he ever wanted to do in life was make animated movies. He managed to work at Walt Disney Studios and even got to meet Walt Disney before he died. He would end up leaving the company years after Walt's death and taking several animators with him due to the disappointment in the company's lackluster works with films like The Rescuers, Robin Hood, and The Aristocats. He made all his movies with his friend, co-producer, co-director, and animator Gary Goldman. His company would ultimately fail due to financial issues, but his work did manage to force Disney to start upping their game and resulted in the Disney Renaissance. The whole history of Don Bluth's animation career is really much more complex and extensive than I care to cover in this video, so I highly recommend watching Animat's video series on the history of Don Bluth, which I will link in the description box below. Trust me, it's a great educational watch that you should definitely check out after you watch this video, of course. While he sadly never managed to become the next Walt Disney due to the failure of certain films and his company filing for bankruptcy, he has undeniably created movies that were a big part of many of our childhoods, some holding up better than others. In this video, I will share my personal rankings where I will briefly go over the plot and talk about what I did and didn't like about the films. First of all, let's go over some guidelines. I will only be covering the movies that Don Bluth actually worked on, which means that sequels to his movies, apart from Bartok the Magnificent, won't be on this list. Besides, the Lamb of Our Time sequels have enough movies to be their own video. Let me know if that's something that you guys would be interested in. Secondly, they had to be full-length animated movies, so his shorts, Banjo the Woodpile Cat, and Small One won't be included on this list. He has to have actually directed the film, which means that his work as an animator or supervisor from Disney will not be included. Also, this video will include spoilers, so don't say I didn't warn you. Lastly, don't take my rankings too seriously. We all have our own personal preferences for what makes a good movie, and our own biases and personal experiences tend to influence how we feel about a movie. This is just my opinion, and if you disagree, that's perfectly fine. Just don't be about it. Now, without any further delay, let's dive right on in. Number 11. A troll in Central Park. In the world of trolls, where trolls are mean, ugly, and hate flowers, lives Stanley, a nice and rosy-cheeked troll that magically grows flowers with his literal green thumb. He was banished by the evil ruler of trolls, Queen Ganorga. He's sent to New York City, right in the middle of Central Park. There he meets and befriends a bratty little boy named Gus and his sweet little toddler sister, Rosie. Ganorga learns how her plan backfired and sets out to destroy Stanley. This tends to be Don Bluth's most universally hated film, and for absolutely good reason. It feels like it was written for a Barney the Dinosaur audience instead of for all ages. It's absolutely pandering, has little to no plot, nothing really happens, a lot of the jokes go on for way too long, and it makes up rules as it goes along like a preschooler at playtime. Stanley can grow plants that are apparently sentient, but can also transport them to a make-believe world with trolls like him and make Gus's toy boat the size of a real boat. When Gus is turned into a troll by Ganorga, he has the ability to turn people into stone with his thumb, and then when he's back to normal, he can unstone Stanley. Ganorga can control Gus's thumb when he's a troll. Gus turns back into normal when Ganorga gets turned into a rose bush. Ganorga didn't think to check the place where she was sending Stanley before sending him there. If Stanley has these other magical abilities, why didn't he just leave the troll world? Oh my Poseidon, it's an absolute mess, and it really feels like something meant to keep your toddler quiet. It doesn't help that the characters we're following are absolutely unlikable. Stanley is absolutely annoying, stupid, and useless. He reminds me of all those annoying toxic positivity people in life that say that you just have to believe and be positive and it'll happen. It doesn't help that he's never any help until the climax, but it doesn't really feel earned due to how pathetic he was. Gus is just an irritating and shrill little brat that would make even the most liberal person want to beat the Tartarus out of him. Even his moments of being a loving brother to Rosie don't help balance out his bratty moments because he's just too annoying and unlikable. Rosie's just there and does nothing but be cutesy. While her cutesiness isn't nearly as pandering and cloying as another character we'll get to in another Don Bluth movie, she adds nothing but to be captured by the villains. Speaking of the villains, they're lame as well. Ganorga is basically like those villains that you see in preschool shows that hate goodness and prettiness and love nastiness because she is a simpleton clown of a villain that you can't take seriously. Her husband is just the pathetic henpecked husband who is totally incompetent and bad comic relief. The songs all suck and feel like rejected songs from a D B-tier preschool show. Childish, pandering, and sounding like the writers had less than a week to write these songs. The sad thing is that this movie, despite how dumb it is, actually had potential. I feel like it would have been interesting to have Gus be an orphan in the foster system that is jaded and pessimistic about life, and he ends up meeting Stanley, who is positive and naive. And the two of them learn and grow from each other, showing that both worldviews have truth to them, but are also flawed. Maybe I'll do a video where I rewrite A Troll in Central Park. Let me know if that's something you guys would be interested in. But as for the movie we got, I was embarrassed when watching it, like I was watching something meant for toddlers. Number 10. Rock-a-doodle. This was definitely the beginning of the end for Don Bluth, but let's get to the plot, such as it is. A singing rooster named Chanticleer has the power to bring up the sun with his crowing, but one day it comes up without him and his quote-unquote friends laugh at him. This was secretly the work of the Grand Duke of Owls, who wants the world in eternal darkness that the light won't hurt him. But it turns out this is all a storybook, because we cut to live action where a real boy named Edmund is told the story by his mother. The rain is endangering Edmund's family farm, so he calls to Chanticleer, which instead brings the Grand Duke of Owls, who turns Edmund into an anime kitten. Edmund teams up with the farm animals and sets off to find Chanticleer in the city, because apparently the sun actually can't come up without Chanticleer. Yeah, that's not all the details in this movie, but the film is both too complicated and too simple at the same time. First of all, they never explain how the sun managed to come up that one time without Chanticleer and suddenly it can't anymore. Or the fact that they don't allow birds at a club but allow penguins, a type of bird. They have Goldie pretend to be in love with Chanticleer, but then the next minute they reveal through narration that she fell in love with him for real out of nowhere. During the climax, Chanticleer reveals that he can't crow anymore for some unexplained reason. The story is all over the place and feels like an acid trip, which is why they put in a lot of unnecessary narration from Patu, which gets annoying because it happens every few minutes. All it does is annoy the audience for being talked down to. The film is so unfocused and all over the place, and I find it hard to even talk about. Also, I find it really annoying that no one believes that Edmund is really a human boy turned into a cat by the Grand Duke of Owls. I mean, y'all know the villain has powers, and yet you find it hard to believe that Edmund is really a human boy? It doesn't help that the characters are all either boring or unbelievably annoying. Edmund is cloying with how precious he is, and it doesn't help that the actor can't act and talks with a lisp. It's odd because in the past, Don Bluth has been great about hiring talented child actors for his films. What happened? Snipes gets the silver medal for most annoying character with his obnoxious and chauvinist personality. Peepers is a smug and know-it-all brat. Patu doesn't shut up with his narration. Goldie is bland with no real character. Chanticleer should be the protagonist but isn't even a character and is instead a plot device. And Hunch takes the gold medal for most irritating thing in this movie, to the point where I'd rather be stuck in a room with the entire cast of Home on the Range than deal with his idiotic antics. The songs are either unmemorable or awful, especially the villain songs. Yes, there's more than one villain song. Even the animation, while great, feels like a downgrade and has such a childish feel to it. It's almost like a more polished, silly symphony. Not to mention the live action scenes are so awkward, with acting so terrible it's giving background or minor characters from Seventh Heaven. Yeah, it's that bad. You can tell that Don Bluth wasn't comfortable with live action because it really shows with this terrible framing device. The only positives I can say about this movie, apart from the animation and voice cast, save for Edmund, is the first song sung by Chanticleer, even if it's nothing spectacular, and the Grand Duke of Owls. He has some class, is decently threatening, and his lines are pretty good, although I would have loved it if he looked like the Great Owl from The Secret of Nim, though it's silly that he gets yeeted by a flashlight. But overall, it's just a terrible movie and clearly something you put on to keep your toddler quiet. They really should have used more of the structure and plot from the original Chanticleer play. Maybe I'll do a rewrite of Rock-a-Doodle one day. Number 9. Titan AE. In the year 3028, the human race is forced to evacuate the planet due to the threat of the Dredge, an alien race made of pure energy that ends up destroying the planet. Before that, a young boy named Kale is given a special ring from his father, who was part of the government and didn't survive. 15 years later, the humans are living amongst aliens, but aren't given the best treatment. Kale has grown up to be arrogant and jaded. He's confronted by Corso, who knew his father, and tells Kale that the ring that his father gave him is actually a map linked to his DNA, and will lead them to Titan, a secret project the humans created in order to make a new planet. So Kale, being forced to come along or be killed by the Dredge, joins a ragtag team to save the human race while fighting the Dredge. This is by far the most boring Don Bluth movie ever, and Don himself never wanted to work on this movie. He said himself that he didn't know anything about sci-fi and wasn't even a fan of it, but if he and Gary Goldman hadn't done it, the animation division at 20th Century Fox would have been shut down, which ended up happening with how this movie bombed. Neither neither Don or Gary were involved in the script, and you can clearly tell due to how lifeless this movie is. Nothing about this movie stands out because it's dull as sandpaper and has no personality. A Troll in Central Park and rock-a-doodle are worse, but at least they had personality. This film had a troubled production history, and it clearly reflects in the writing with what an absolute mess this is. First of all, the motivation of the Dredge destroying Earth because they were afraid of what the human race would become is very flimsy. I know prejudice isn't based on logic, but this is just a weak reason. There are a lot of things that don't make sense, like how Akima gets shot and then she's just told that she needs to rest without anyone doing anything to fix her wound. It's also really insane that the dad would give his son, who couldn't have been any older than 6 years old, a ring that was humanity's last hope. First of all, ignoring the fact that any child that young would most likely lose it, he basically just put a target on his son. Not to mention that despite it being 15 years later, Kale is acting like the events just happened. Why is he asking for ketchup and complaining about the food moving when he should be used to eating alien food by now, and at this point wouldn't even remember what ketchup tastes like? Not to mention, are we really supposed to believe that characters would be dressing like this in the 3000s? They look like grunge from the 2000s. It's just weak world building. Corso as a twist villain makes little sense because there's no build-up. Why would he be trying to appeal to Kale's humanity when he made it clear that he didn't care about humanity? This is a sentiment that Corso shares, so why not play to Kale's ego and what he could get out of it instead? Also, the way he gets caught because he was too stupid to make sure the door was closed is ridiculous. His redemption at the end wasn't convincing in the slightest. Speaking of Kale, he's one of the most unlikable protagonists from a Don Bluth movie. He's an arrogant jerk that treats everyone terribly. I know that he's been through a lot, but he's just too harsh to be likable. Not to mention he doesn't even care about saving humanity, but would rather just get something out of it. The rest of the characters aren't very likable either. These are some of the most forgettable characters that you will ever meet. Akima is just a generic love interest and a tough girl. Corso is dull. Stealth is just a violent hothead and that's all. June is just some pointless comic relief that isn't even putting much effort into it. And the Dredge are the most boring villains to ever exist. The only character I find to be entertaining is Preed, which is thanks to the fact that Nathan Lane is hamming it up a bit to make the character more interesting and fun to watch, but not to the point where it's too over the top. The other actors play the characters too straight, and that makes the characters feel too static, whereas Nathan Lane adds some much needed entertainment. Speaking of the acting, this movie is proof why just because someone is a talented actor, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily good at voice acting. Matt Damon and Drew Barrymore are clearly talented actors, but their performances are too dry and lifeless. It feels like they just foamed it in, and their inexperience in voice acting clearly shows. The animation is another issue. While the 2D animation looks more amazing as always, due to the production troubles that caused a lot of people to get laid off, they had to cut corners by using CG animation for the backgrounds, special effects, spaceships, the Dredge, and even spacesuits. At times, it can look nice, but most of the time it looks really dated. They don't even blend well at all, and it's just really jarring. The soundtrack is also odd with its very dated rock songs that don't really match the tone of the film. I will admit that I'm not the biggest fan of sci-fi, but I'm especially not a fan of sci-fi that goes for a dull, lifeless, and apocalyptic look to it that makes it just boring and lack any creativity. It deserves to be known as the film that destroyed Don Bluth's career. Number 8. Bartok the Magnificent, the only direct-to-video sequel that Don Bluth and Gary Goldman ever actually worked on, which is meant to be a prequel to Anastasia focusing on Bartok. Supposedly, taking place sometime before the events of Anastasia, Bartok is a con artist with his own personal circuits, with his partner in crime, a bear named Zosie. The royal advisor Lumilla claims that the young Prince Ivan was kidnapped by the infamous witch Baba Yaga, so Bartok, given his false accomplishments, is sent to rescue the prince. He must accomplish 3 missions in order to save the prince, but Baba Yaga obviously didn't kidnap the prince. It was really the clearly evil royal advisor Lumilla, who wants the throne for herself. The biggest issue this movie has is how it feels absolutely disconnected from the original Anastasia. This is meant to be a prequel, but how long ago? Obviously, this takes place in a different time period, but based on the fashion, it's so long ago, it's clear that there's no way Bartok could have lived long enough to be there during the events of the original movie. Not to mention that considering all he did to help Prince Ivan, it doesn't seem realistic that he would one day work for a man that would plan to kill the royal family. I know people change, but this is a pretty big leap with no real explanation. Plus, while there was magic and fantasy in the original movie, it still had a level of being grounded in reality, whereas this movie is clearly meant to be more fantasy, campy, and doesn't take place in a world grounded in any form of reality. It just feels like 2 completely different worlds. This might have worked better if Bartok wasn't the protagonist. Don't get me wrong, I love Bartok, but his inclusion just gives the film continuity issues when it would have been better to just have the the film been given a protagonist that was unique to this film. However, the story would still leave much to be desired. It's too repetitive, and the message is really on the nose. It just screams that it was a direct-to-video project. The animation is clearly the weakest looking of all of Don Bluth's movies, due to it being made for direct-to-video and not the big screen. However, it's still pretty good animation. Yes, there is a clear indication the corners were cut, and the CGI is really dated and jarring, but it's still pretty to look at and really plays into the more whimsical fairy tale folklore look. Not to mention, the animators clearly had a lot of fun with Baba Yaga and Pilaf, who are some of the best characters in this movie thanks to the voice acting and animation. Lumilla is an absolutely delightful villain. Yes, she's power-hungry, selfish, and cares very little for those below her, but it's clear that she's also frustrated with being bossed around and ignored by her boss, who is a literal child. Speaking of which, where are his parents? Anyway, I love how Lumilla is clearly on the brink of losing that last shred of sanity she has left. Plus, the performance by Catherine O'Hara is excellent as usual, which makes Lumilla so much fun to watch. I wish we got to see more of her. May Catherine O'Hara rest in peace. However, Zozie doesn't add much to the movie or have much of a point beyond just motivating Bartok. Also, why bring Kelsey Grammer back to voice another character in this movie when he's already voiced Vlad and Anastasia? The songs aren't anything to write home about. The lyrics aren't anything special, the melodies don't grab me and are just so mediocre. The titular song is definitely the worst, especially since Hank Azaria is no singer and makes it hard to listen to. Kelsey Grammer has a great voice, but A Possible Hero is so forgettable. Catherine O'Hara has a nice enough voice, but the real Lumilla just isn't it. It's so unmemorable and nothing about it stands out to me. Plus, the imagery that likely inspired a lot of fetishist people on DeviantArt isn't helping. So while not a bad movie, it's very mediocre. Number 7. The Pebble and the Penguin. Taking place in Antarctica, the Adelie penguins are preparing for their mating ritual, where the male penguins will present a pebble to a female penguin they fancy. If she accepts, they mate for life. Our protagonist, a shy and stuttering penguin named Hubie, is in love with Marina, and the feeling seems to be mutual. However, Hubie can't seem to get a pebble until one night where he wishes on a star and an emerald cube falls from the sky. Unfortunately, an evil macho penguin named Drake is also after Marina's flipper in marriage, and tries to get rid of the competition. Hubie manages to escape and meets a cranky and wisecracking penguin named Rocco, who agrees to help Hubie and get back home before the mating ceremony, and they form a friendship along the way. This was a movie that I watched a lot as a kid, but it sadly doesn't hold up at all. While it's not bad, it's just an above average mess. The movie was a production nightmare, and it shows in the final product. This can clearly be seen in the writing with how it tends to skim over important details like showing Hubie getting captured by humans, how Rocco survived the killer whales, explaining the apparent magical powers of the pebble that can let Hubie see what's happening with Marina back home only once and is never brought up again, and the rules of the mating ceremony. Apparently there's a law that says that you have to choose a mate before the full moon mating ceremony or you're banished. It's done to make Marina's situation more dire, but it just makes the world building a bit ridiculous. The pacing is also all over the place, hence why the film has narration that works at the beginning and at the end of the film, but is constantly done throughout the film to the point where it feels pandering and unnecessary, because the film should have been able to show it by itself. It's clearly not as bad as rock-a-doodle's narration, but it's still really pointless. They even give Rocco the ability to fly at the end of the film, but give no real explanation of how this is possible. The only explanation is lazy writing. Hubie is a really unlikable protagonist. He acts like a self-proclaimed quote-unquote nice guy, is really selfish, doesn't respect Rocco's clear boundaries, manipulates and lies to Rocco to get what he wants from him, and faces no real consequences. It's absolutely useless to the point where he's more of a damsel in distress than the actual damsel in distress, and actually held his breath until Rocco said he liked him like a spoiled 4-year-old. His motivations for wanting to be with Marina aren't any different than Drake's, which is her looks. The only difference is that Drake is more upfront about it. I appreciate the representation for people with speech problems, as I myself struggled with that as a child, but the character is so unlikable that I can't appreciate it that much. While he's not as bad as Stanley or Kale, he's still a really terrible protagonist. Marina is just there to be the love interest and promote the film's message that it's not the pebble, it's the penguin, and that's it. She at least has a beautiful singing voice though. Hubie's 3 bird friends are pointless and add nothing to the story. You'll forget about them until they pop up. The only good characters are Rocco and Drake. Rocco is really enjoyable with his tough guy and wisecracking personality, and we often feel his frustration with Hubie, given the fact that Hubie is awful. But their friendship isn't convincing because it was terribly developed, with him never showing signs of liking Hubie. Drake is voiced by Tim Curry, and that's pretty much all you need to make a villain great. The character gives Gaston but a lot smarter, and has a lot of charm due to Tim Curry's stellar performance. The animation is still great, though there are times that it's clear that corners have been cut, with some cells not being finished and characters being frozen in frame. But the animation is still gorgeous to look at, especially the killer whale chase, which is really spectacular, especially with how the orcas are animated. The action scenes in general are great. I also love the creativity with the opening sequence Now and Forever. Speaking of which, the soundtrack is a banger. Barry Manilow does the music for this film, and I am thankful for his contribution. This is by far the most enjoyable aspect of the film, with songs that feel like they were made for Broadway. The only song that I don't like is The Good Ship Misery. The melody isn't very good, the vocals are too harsh at times, and it's just meh. And while I don't think Looks Like I Got Me a Friend works in the film due to the lack of development between the characters, and Hubie holding his breath till he gets what he wants like a Karen is off-putting, the song is still really catchy and fun. The rest of the songs absolutely slap. Now and Forever, Sometimes I Wonder, and Dope Made Me Laugh are bangers. If there's any reason to check out this film, it's just for the songs. The score is also gorgeous. The story and characters are a mess, but at least it sounds and looks beautiful. Number 6. All Dogs Go to Heaven. It's about a German Shepherd named Charlie Bargain who is killed by his ex-business partner Carface and goes to heaven. However, Charlie doesn't want to be dead and decides to rewind his life watch to bring himself back to life, and he shall remain alive so long as the watch remains ticking. Otherwise, he'll die and go to hell because he can't go back to heaven. He then tries to get back at Carface with the help of his cowardly but loyal best friend Itchy by quote-unquote rescuing a little girl named Anne-Marie who can talk to animals that Carface has been using to win bets. Charlie uses her for the same thing, but is clearly nicer to her, though it's just to get into her good graces, but ends up forming a bond with her. As a kid, I was absolutely in love with this movie and would watch it constantly, especially the heaven scenes. While I'm not quite as in love with it as I used to be, I still adore it. The story, while a bit messy, is still really fun and engaging. Part of that is the atmosphere, especially when we're in heaven or hell. Those scenes show off some of Don Bluth's best work. It has a lot of interesting ideas, like the clocks representing the life of someone. Plus, the actual hell scene was the stuff of nightmares, and I loved it for how dark and twisted it was. The animation is top-notch as always. I've always loved Don Bluth's expert use of color. The characters, while flawed, are also really likable. Carface is a really fun villain, Itchy is really likable and funny, and I honestly do believe Charlie's development. He's done some heinous actions, but it's proof that anyone can change, and while it's not the best development, I find it genuine. I also love the relationship between the characters. Charlie and Itchy have a great friendship with more amazing chemistry, which is helped by Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise being friends in real life. Charlie's relationship with Anne-Marie is also really sweet and the heart of the film. The action scenes are a lot of fun. I also love that the movie had the guts to let Charlie die at the end, and not find a way to bring him back to life without the watch. That's really impressive that they let the protagonist die, and I admire them for that, which leads to an ending that's the most emotional part of the film. It manages to have me in tears every single time. However, it's not quite as polished as some other films, such as the fact that Charlie is trying to lay low and keep Carface from finding him and Anne-Marie, but still promotes his name for his casino right in the same town. Carface never has a realization, and we just cut to him assuming Charlie is alive and has Anne-Marie without any buildup. Also, they established that the animals can't talk to animals outside of their species, but Charlie can talk to the big-lipped alligator. While the pacing isn't horrible, it's a bit messy. The songs are a mixed bag, apart from Let Me Be Surprised, at least the part that's sung by Annabelle, Soon You'll Come Home, and the end credits song Love Survives, but the rest of the songs are pointless and not very pleasant to listen to. Part of that is because they're mostly sung by Burt Reynolds, who just isn't a singer. He sounds like he's talk singing and isn't pleasant. Yes, he sang Let Me Be Surprised, but at least Annabelle, voiced by Melba Moore, could sing, which helped balance it out, and it had fun lyrics. Had they gotten someone to dub Burt singing, I feel like these songs would have turned out better. Not Disney quality, but still. Let's Make Music Together has great singing and would be a good song on its own, but it serves no purpose and it gives tonal whiplash. It's no wonder this became a meme. Soon You'll Come Home, despite clearly not being sung by Judith Barcy, is a genuinely great song. But this movie clearly wasn't meant to be a musical since the songs feel tacked on. However, while the film is great on its own, Anne-Marie is what elevates this movie into a masterpiece. Without her, the film wouldn't be half as enjoyable. Not only is she absolutely adorable, but she's the heart of the film. She's sweet without being cloying, spunky without being a raging fireball, and smart but still realistic and naive. She was always a delight every time she was on screen, and part of that is the perfect casting of Judith Barcy. She was amazing as Ducky, but this is the role I tend to associate with her more. She gives it her all and even outacts the adult actors, and becomes the standout performer. She's honestly one of the great child actors, and it's really sad that she and her mother were murdered by her father. It honestly makes the ending all the more emotional for me. Also, while this is minor, I hate that she ends up wearing those rags for the rest of the movie after she got so many beautiful new outfits. Let her wear one of those dresses. My personal favorites are her sailor dress and her fur trim coat. So while this movie has flaws, it's still a classic. Number 5. Thumbelina. It's about a girl no bigger than a thumb who was born from a flower given to an old woman that longed for a child. Thumbelina longs to find people who are the same size as her, and one night meets and falls in love with the fairy prince Cornelius. But before the two can live happily ever after, Thumbelina is stolen by Mama Toad, who wants to use Thumbelina's beautiful voice to make money and force her to marry her son Grundle, who is in love with her. Thumbelina manages to escape with the help of a swallow named Giacomo. Meanwhile, Cornelius and Grundle search for Thumbelina. All the while, Thumbelina must find her way home to be reunited with both her mother and Cornelius while facing obstacles and learning her own self-worth. This was a movie I watched a lot as a kid, and it honestly still holds a special place in my heart to this day. Is it flawed? Yes. The story is a bit too episodic, but to be fair, that's exactly what the original story was like as well. Plus, I don't hear people complain about that with movies like Alice in Wonderland, Pinocchio, and Moana. I do think it would have benefited from a couple of rewrites, but considering Don Bluth had to write the script within the span of a couple of weeks, I feel like he did a pretty good job. Another issue is the designs of the characters, like the jitterbugs and the animals on Thumbelina's farm looking way too exaggerated and like characters from a preschool book. I feel like this could have benefited from Don Bluth's early dark style, as it would make a contrast from the bright and happy world that Thumbelina knew when she was with her mother and the beautiful night she spent with Cornelius to a world that she's unfamiliar with. The darkness from the Secret of Nim would have especially worked when she's in the world underground. However, it's honestly a masterpiece in my opinion. I can forgive it for having plot holes because of the fact that I can suspend my disbelief when it comes to fairy tale movies where it runs off emotion rather than logic and is more impressionistic. So I don't care that she randomly grew wings because it didn't make much sense in the original fairy tale either. Plus, she was created from magic, so who's to say that she can't just magically get wings? Not to mention, it's symbolic of her becoming her own person. I can forgive it, whereas I couldn't forget the plot holes of Frozen because it was too meta. The characters in this movie are all great and entertaining. They're just so memorable and fun to watch in my personal opinion. Mama Toad, Miss Fieldmouse, the Beetle, Mr. Mole, Hero, Cornelius, and especially Thumbelina. I know a lot of people complain that Thumbelina just whined and didn't really do anything, but considering the fact that she was taken away from her home, has never been outside the real world before, is constantly being accosted by someone, is no bigger than a thumb, and later believes the love of her life is dead, I'd say she has every right to complain and not to have much hope. Plus, it comes off as victim blaming. Her journey is that people keep on telling her what to be and what to do, and she has to learn to stand up for herself and find her own self-worth. Something many people struggle with. Could it have been better? Yes, but I feel like it was done pretty well. I relate to Thumbelina's struggles due to my autism and how I feel like there isn't a place for people like me in this world. So I couldn't help but root for Thumbelina and sympathize with her situation. But she isn't just a stick in the mud. She's playful, bubbly, charming, sweet, and is just so endearing. A subversion of her pessimistic outlook, making her unique. Part of why she's so great is definitely thanks to the stellar performance of Jodie Benson, who did the voice of Ariel in The Little Mermaid. Unlike Matthew Broderick as adult Simba in The Lion King, which came out the same year, Jodie Benson managed to help the character feel fleshed out and make her personality fly off the screen due to her prior experiences instead of suffering from a flat performance. And while The Lion King is definitely a better movie, Simba suffers because of Matthew Broderick's performance. I know a lot of people hate Giacomo, and I was ready to hate him too, but he's actually not bad. My only issue is the fact that he could have just flown Thumbelina home this entire time. He's based on a character that didn't appear until the last third of the story, and even then he didn't fly Thumbelina home because she just completely forgot about her mother, who was worried sick about her and is never seen again. While it's annoying how he meets her quite a few times and they never think to just have him fly her home, he's actually not a bad character. He's a helpful character that supports Thumbelina, such as when she's feeling insecure about her appearance, he reminds her that it doesn't matter what others think and that there are people who love her. I feel like the issue could have been fixed if he injured his wing when they first meet, after trying to save her, and therefore couldn't fly her home. Plus, given all the terrible comic comic reliefs I've been seeing from Disney lately, he's a lot less annoying and actually serves a purpose. Though I do wish that he had listened to Thumbelina when she was trying to tell him Cornelius was quote-unquote dead. The only characters I'm not so fond of are Grundle the Toad and Thumbelina's 3 jitterbug friends. The latter are just pointless and add nothing other than saving Cornelius when he's frozen, but they could have had his pet Bumblebee do that. In the case of Grundle, he's just not convincing as a villain and even makes Gaston look competent. He'd work better as a villain sidekick. I honestly think Mama Toad should have been the main antagonist, with her son being her lackey, sort of a fairy godmother and Charming from Shrek 2 situation. She's far more entertaining and interesting, and I wish we saw more of her. Same with Miss Fieldmouse, who could have been just as much of a villain as Mama Toad. The romance between Thumbelina and Cornelius is so cute. While I do think they should have had more of a conversation together where they get to know each other before the Let Me Be Your Wings scene, I do buy their chemistry. There's at least more of a basis for their relationship than the Disney princess couples from Walt's time. Plus, I can forgive the romance being more simple, with this being more of an impressionistic fairy tale. Not to mention, this is a gorgeous looking movie, one of Don Bluth's best looking films. Yes, I've mentioned some of the designs are too childish looking and some CGI is very dated, but the animation is still absolutely phenomenal. For the flying scenes, they took inspiration from ice skating, which explains how graceful and elegant they look. The movie takes my breath away, especially the Let Me Be Your Wings scene. Speaking of which, the soundtrack absolutely slaps. The songs were done by singer-songwriter Barry Manilow, and he did a phenomenal job. The songs are entertaining, move the story along, and show how the characters are feeling. That is the purpose of a musical. Even with a song like Your Beautiful Baby that doesn't really have good singing, it's still entertaining to watch with its high energy. The best songs are definitely Let Me Be Your Wings, Soon, and The Sun, but I love all the songs. Well, except for Mary the Mole. It's infamous for being the only song from an animated movie to win a Razzie for Worst Original Song, and while it's not good, it's not that bad either. It's okay, and it being the only animated song to win a Razzie means nothing when the Razzies no longer have that category, and they are infamous for not even watching the films that they nominate. But apart from that one hiccup, the soundtrack is amazing, and it's impressive that he had no prior experience with musicals, especially given what happened with Wish, which hired pop artists to write the music and their inexperience showed. Disney needs to fire Lin-Manuel Miranda and hire Barry Manilow. Call me blinded by nostalgia all you want, but I adore this movie. I could go on about how this film is an underrated gem, but let's save that for another day. Number 4. An American Tale, the story about the Moskowitzes, a family of mice that are clearly Jewish that immigrate to America where they believe that there aren't any cats. Unfortunately, Fievel gets separated from his family after nearly drowning. Having arrived in America, specifically New York, he sets off to find his family while meeting some colorful characters that either try to exploit him or help him find his family and discovering that there are indeed cats in America. So as you could probably tell, this movie is influenced by the treatment of immigrants that come to America to escape their problems only to find that America is full of problems as well. It's a very complex issue, and while this movie mainly focuses on Fievel's struggles to find his family, these issues are handled pretty well. It's not afraid to show the harsh realities, but also knows how to make it simple enough for kids to digest and help them learn more about it when they get older without dumbing it down or having nothing of value for adults. I didn't grow up with this movie. I only saw it once on Cartoon Network when I was a kid and didn't really watch it again until I was a teenager. But I wish I had grown up with it. I love how dark and serious this movie is without it being so dull and lifeless. While Fievel did cause his situation with deliberately throwing his hat on deck so that he could see the fish during the storm, you can still sympathize with him. Yes, it's his fault, but he's also just a kid that I'm guessing isn't older than 6 years old in mouse years. He's lost and alone in a new country where he doesn't know anyone and has no idea where his family is. The emotions of his family are very strong as well, since all of them, apart from Fievel's big sister Tanya, believe him to be dead. I love how this movie allows the emotional moments not to be interrupted by pointless comedy like a lot of movies nowadays. It allows the moments to breathe and be quiet. This is the first Don Bluth movie that is a musical, and I will be honest and say that while they're good, they are not great, apart from Somewhere Out There, though I do prefer the end credit version sung by Linda Ronstadt and James Ingram, not only because of their phenomenal vocals, but also because the singing voices for Fievel and Tanya aren't very good. While the child actors did a great job when it came to the acting, they really should have gotten singing doubles for them, because it makes it hard to listen to. The others have better singing in them, even if Fievel still does sing in Never Say Never and a duo, but they aren't anything to brag about. They're fun, but nothing nothing great. Plus, there are no cats in America honestly plays into some ethnic stereotypes. Also, fun fact, I actually did sing Somewhere Out There when I was in high school choir during my freshman year. The villain Warranty Rat isn't really anything great or even very interesting. He serves his purpose, but he's not gonna make a lasting impact. Plus, his little bug friend adds nothing, and the two of them don't even have a very interesting dynamic. Luckily, the rest of the characters are incredibly likable and fun. My favorite is Gussie. She's very flamboyant and prissy, but she also cares about others and standing up for what is right, despite also being very privileged, showing that individuals are multidimensional. The animation is gorgeous, though the rotoscoping is obvious. The action scenes are pretty intense, especially when the cats are super feral and monstrous. The score is epic, and it will absolutely make you cry, especially when Fievel is reunited with his family. I love how soft and timid Fievel's voice is, with that twinge of hope that his family is still out there when he hears their voices calling for him and his father playing the violin. It honestly gets me misty-eyed, and I have to fight the tears when he's reunited with his family, which I fail at. It should also be noted that this is one of the few times in animation where Jewish characters are portrayed as heroes and not as a joke or as villains with very Jewish features. Yes, you could argue that it's not the best because of the fact that they're portrayed as mice, but it's nice to see them as a loving family and characters with fleshed out personalities that aren't just stereotypes. It's a masterpiece, and it's clear to see why this is considered one of Don Bluth's best films. It's a classic for a reason. However, while this, along with Thumbelina and All Dogs Go to Heaven, are masterpieces, the top 3 are legitimate 10 out of 10 movies. Number 3. The Secret of NIMH. The recently widowed Mrs. Brisby is trying to save the life of her youngest son, Timmy, who is sick with pneumonia and is told by Mr. Ages that Timmy can't go outside or he could die. Things get more complicated when the farmer decides to plow early, and while Mrs. Brisby and Auntie Shrew manage to stop it temporarily, it's only a matter of time until he fixes it. So Mrs. Brisby visits the Great Owl with the assistance of Jeremy the Crow, who informs her that the rats of NIMH can help her. She gets the help of Mr. Ages and Justin, who are members of the organization, who help her meet Nicodemus, who gives her a magical amulet and has the rats help her move her home to where it's safe. However, secretly there is a plan from the villain Jenner, who wants to kill Nicodemus. So as you can tell, there is a lot going on in this movie based on my crude summary, but to be fair, it never actually feels like too much is going on to the point where the story feels messy. The story actually is very flowing and nothing feels crammed apart from Jeremy, who is the worst part of the movie, and like everyone, I can't stand him. He reminds me a lot of those comic reliefs from modern Disney movies who add nothing but bad and forced comedy. But apart from that, everything else feels organically woven into the story. It never feels like it's too detailed because it knows what to keep vague and what to elaborate on. The score is epic and helps things feel grand, not to mention the whole question of morality of the movie that is very well done and complex, but done in a way that kids can understand without talking down to them. It's all very relevant in this day and age. I love the dark elements of this film as it helps give it a lot of atmosphere. I'm a sucker for a dark fantasy film. While I wouldn't say that it feels like a movie that you could play on Halloween, it's still a pretty dark film. Part of that is the designs of certain characters. I absolutely adore the design of the Great Owl. Just look at this guy. He looks so majestic and mysterious. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie, with my favorite being when Mrs. Brisby uses the stone. Speaking of Mrs. Brisby, she is a really great and unique character. She's not a heroine who has grand ambitions, but rather is a mother who just wants to exist enjoying life and for her children to be happy and healthy. She's timid and not the bravest, but despite her fears is willing to do whatever it takes to save her son's life. She does get braver, but it's not to the point where she feels like she went through some major character development. I kind of like that she gets to stay who she is. She's a loving and caring person who doesn't have to change who she is, and doesn't really gain any confidence, but is just a likable and gentle character that will throw herself into danger if it means saving the ones that she loves, or even someone she just met like Jeremy. Although, I will say that she should have just let Jeremy die and put us all out of our misery. Plus, I love that she's a timid and shy character, which rarely get to be the protagonist and be shown as just as valuable as the more action-oriented and blunt heroines. And this is honestly what Mirabelle from Encanto should have been like, but that's a subject for another time, and one I've technically already covered. The rest of the characters, apart from Jeremy, are also interesting and likable. Even though Auntie Shrew and Mr. Ages are grouchy characters, it still comes from a loving place. The voice acting is top-notch, especially Elizabeth Hartman as Mrs. Brisby, Derek Jacobi as Nicodemus, and John Carradine as the Great Owl. The animation is some of Don Bluth's best work, especially with the scene where Mrs. Brisby uses the stone. This was clearly a passion project for Don Bluth, and it really shows, as he's often referred to it as his favorite movie he's ever made. While I wouldn't say that's my personal favorite, it's definitely among some of the best. Sadly, I didn't grow up with this movie and didn't see it until I was in high school. However, I wish I had grown up with it because it's a genuine masterpiece and is better than anything Disney was releasing around that time. Terrorist is better than any of the movies Disney's releasing nowadays. I know I'll get some hate for not putting it at number 1, but my top 2 are actually in my top 3 favorite movies of all time. Number 2. The Land Before Time, long before the double-digit sequels, with their lighthearted feel and musical numbers, was a pretty dark film devoid of musical numbers. And to make things easier, I won't be referring to them by their scientific terms, but instead the simple terms that they were given in the movie. Anyway, it takes place during the time of the dinosaurs, when the Earth was changing, and the Leaf Eaters set out to find the Great Valley, a place unchanged and filled with fresh water and lush green food. Littlefoot, a young longneck, and Sarah, a young three-horn, get attacked by a sharptooth. They are saved by Littlefoot's mother, but at the cost of her life, and Littlefoot must travel to the Great Valley and find his grandparents. Along the way, he meets Sarah again, as well as a swimmer named Ducky, a flyer named Petrie, and a mute spiketail named Spike. They must try to find the Great Valley while trying not to perish from hunger, as well as not getting eaten by Sharptooth. I'm not gonna lie, I grew up watching the Land Before Time films religiously as a kid. Anytime a new Land Before Time movie came out, I had to have it. But let's save my opinion on the other movies for a different video. Let's face it, the original film is by far superior to the sequels. Like, it's not even close. First of all, this is one of Don Bluth's best looking films. In fact, it's his second best looking film. What's his best looking film? We'll get to that later. The film manages to make the world look so gorgeous, despite the fact that they're living in a barren wasteland, which shows that you don't have to make a film be brown and gray in order to make it look apocalyptic. But maybe that's just one of the advantages of animation, specifically traditional animation. Like I said, Don Bluth is a masterclass with his use of color. The Great Valley is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, the visuals are nothing short of spectacular. Not to mention the action scenes are absolutely phenomenal. By far the best action scene is the Sharptooth attack when Littlefoot's mother is battling the Sharptooth, especially during the earthquake. It was absolutely intense and I adored for that. Not to mention the score of the entire movie is just epic and iconic. Speaking of Littlefoot's mother, I was absolutely heartbroken by this as a kid, and even now it makes me absolutely bawl. And considering I'm a merman that lives under the sea, that's saying something. I love how they really take the time to allow Littlefoot to properly grieve for the loss of his mother, with being angry about it, depressed in an unhealthy way, finding comfort in her footprint, thinking he hears her voice, though it's arguable whether or not her spirit is actually guiding him, thinking for a brief moment that she's still alive, and ultimately accepting the fact that she's truly gone. It's harsh, but it's important for kids to learn how to accept loss because they'll inevitably have to face it. While on the subject of Littlefoot, he's always been one of my favorite fictional male characters. Part of this is also because of the sequels, but in the original movie he's just as mermazing. I love how he actually acts like a real kid that makes mistakes and has flaws while still being a great leader with a strong moral compass. One of my issues with Arnold from Hey Arnold, despite my immense love for the show, is that Arnold after season 1 starts becoming too perfect and helps others learn lessons but never seems to learn a lesson himself, and never even gets grounded, especially in the last 2 seasons. Littlefoot is stubborn, can be sassy, is playful, strong-willed, fun-loving, and more so in the sequels can be surprisingly sarcastic. He has his doubts and can be a bit self-righteous at times, but it's never to the point where it's unbearable. He's just an overall fantastic character. As for the other characters, part of the reason why this film works is because they're all so likable and engaging. Ducky is absolutely adorable and endearing, which is helped by a pitch-perfect performance from Judith Barcy. Spike is so cute and lovable, which is odd due to my usual hatred of characters who have eating being one of their prime characteristics, but for some reason, he's just so likable. I will admit that I prefer Petrie in the sequels, at least in movies 2 through 6, but I still love and enjoy him in this movie. I just find him funny. I think part of that is that his voice, that just helps make him funny to me. Plus, unlike someone like Jeremy, Petrie is actually plot relevant, but I do think that the fake out death was really unnecessary. As for Sarah, I will admit growing up I absolutely couldn't stand her. However, watching this movie again for my Don Bluth marathon, she actually grew on me. Maybe it's because recently I've been seeing a lot of unlikable and poorly developed characters, but Sarah just didn't annoy me. Part of the reason is because unlike Isabella from Encanto, instead of being a grown woman acting like an unbearable brat, Sarah is just a child, and unlike Sasha from the Barbie movie, she's not like this because, oh, she's a teenager. Especially when Sarah isn't a teenager, but because of her upbringing. Plus, unlike these unbearable characters, we do get some softer moments from her sprinkled throughout the movie that don't make her character development feel out of nowhere or half-baked, and help her feel like a character with depth. I'm shocked about how short this film is, which comes in just a little over an hour. I feel like this film could have used 20 more minutes to help flesh things out. It manages to handle generational traditions and prejudice pretty well, but I feel like that 20 minutes could have developed it a bit more. The film was edited quite a bit, and if you're an average moviegoer and not someone who analyzes things like me, you won't notice. However, if you are like me and notice details like that, it might bother you a little, but you'll still have a great time. The narration throughout the film also works because it's basically telling a story about the land before time. It felt organically integrated into the story. The only time it bugged me was when Sarah had her self-pity moment because it wasn't necessary. I absolutely love the friendship between the characters and it feels absolutely believable. Even between Littlefoot and Sarah, era with all their conflict. Not to mention all the struggles are more engaging when you realize that these are just kids having to go through things that even adult dinosaurs struggle to do, which is survive. And the #1 Don Bluth movie is Anastasia. Inspired by the historical events of the real-life Grand Duchess Anastasia, our story takes place in 1916 when the Tsar Nicholas II of Russia is celebrating the 300th anniversary of the Romanov family. However, it's interrupted by Rasputin, who places a curse to have Nicholas and his immediate family die. He's successful in his mission with the exception of the youngest daughter, Anastasia, who manages to escape with her grandmother, the Dowager Empress Marie, and even cause Rasputin's death. However, the two of them get separated and Anastasia gets amnesia. 10 years later, the Dowager Empress is offering a reward for anyone who can reunite her with the lost princess. Two con men, Vladimir and Dmitri, try to find an Anastasia lookalike in order to get the money. They come across an orphan named Anya, who looks just like Anastasia and is trying to find her family in Paris, which is where the Dowager Empress lives. And they convince her that she could be Anastasia without telling her about their scheme. But it turns out she is the real Anastasia, and along the journey, her and Dmitri fall in love. Meanwhile, Rasputin, trapped in limbo and literally falling apart, schemes to kill her so that his curse can be fulfilled. This is a movie I watched all the time as a little merboy, and it actually got me interested in the history of the real-life royal family when I was a teenager. So don't be surprised if my love for this movie shines through. During the 90s, many companies were trying to capitalize off the Disney Renaissance, with very few being able to hold their own. This film was one of the exceptions, and part of that is because of Don Bluth's previous experience working at Disney. He knew what made it work, and the lack of magic during Disney's Bronze Age was why he left Disney to begin with. However, he added his own signature touch to it, which I felt was missing in Thumbelina. The movie is definitely dark, and not just because of the subject matter. I mean, you got a villain trying to kill off the protagonist by using images of her dead family to make her sleepwalk to her doom. That's pretty dark. I feel like Don Bluth is most comfortable with stories that are dark, and I love him for that. This is by far Don Bluth's most gorgeous looking film. Due to the fact that this was made with 20th Century Fox, he was able to have much more of a budget than he did with his past works, and it clearly shows in every frame. This is one of the most gorgeous looking animated movies I've ever seen. It's a massive film with scale, stellar colors, amazing character designs, and one of the most stunning animated sequences with Once Upon a December. Not to mention, Anastasia has such an incredible wardrobe, arguably the best of any animated heroine. There is some CGI in the film, but I feel like it works to the film's advantage, especially when it comes to the nightmare scene. It never really looked jarring to me, and for the most part, blends seamlessly. Anastasia herself is one of my favorite fictional characters, and if she were an official Disney princess, she'd be my second favorite after Ariel. I absolutely adore how sassy, snarky, and sarcastic she is. I look for opportunities to repeat a lot of her one-liners in real life, which I've managed to do. She's one of the characters I credit for me being so flippant, snarky, and sarcastic with an endless amount of sass, but she's also caring and kind to help balance her out and not just feel like a hothead. However, she clearly has her limits and isn't afraid to call people out, and I love her for that. She's honestly the best protagonist of any Don Bluth movie, even better than Littlefoot. The rest of the characters are also really likable. They are all entertaining no matter how little screen time they have, which is helped by stellar performances. I know a lot of people don't like Rasputin, but I honestly think he's the best of all of Don Bluth's villains. Yes, he's comedic, but it doesn't feel like it's ever to a ridiculous extent like Ganorga and her husband. Plus, despite his comedic moments, he's actually legitimately intimidating, and I can take him seriously as a villain, such as the scene where he tries to have Anastasia's family lure her to her death, which is helped by a more amazing design and a phenomenal performance by Christopher Lloyd. Bartok may not be necessary to the plot, but he is a lot of fun, and it's nice to have a villain sidekick who is actually competent and not an idiot. Plus, he's absolutely quotable. The movie is also able to hit you in the feels with scenes like the reunion between Anastasia and her grandmother. We see a jaded old woman that has dealt with loss, and people trying to con her slowly start to let down her guard and realize that this woman is her long-lost granddaughter. The moment where she calls Anya her Anastasia always gets me emotional. The music is absolutely phenomenal. This is the best soundtrack of any Don Bluth musical. I know that's not saying much considering the track record of Don Bluth musicals, but it's really amazing. It even blows Thumbelina out of the water. Every single one of them are bangers and have a Broadway style to them that I absolutely adore. The best songs are definitely Once Upon a December, Journey to the Past, and In the Dark of the Night. The songs are all memorable, full of energy, have great vocals, especially the songs sung by Liz Calloway and Bernadette Peters. The score is absolutely brilliant, especially the prologue and the nightmare. I'm a sucker for epic choir singing and a score. An issue I do have with the film is something that a lot of people love, and that's Dmitri and his relationship with Anastasia. Now don't get me wrong, they're not bad, they're still good, but I feel feel like both were slightly rushed. They went from arguing, then they'll learn to do a musical number which didn't focus on their relationship. He gives her a dress that she snarks on, she changes her hair and puts on a pretty dress, and suddenly they have feelings for each other. That was just an odd transition. I feel like they should have stopped bickering after they escaped the train and have them start being nicer to each other. That would have felt more organic. It just makes Dimitri seem like he only started to fall for Anya because of her looks, which doesn't make him or the relationship look the best. However, I do still enjoy Dimitri and the relationship. I just feel like they needed to develop the relationship a bit more. In all honesty, I would say that's the best romance from a Don Bluth movie, but the standards aren't that high. But I believe Dimitri's development and his relationship with Anastasia is convincing with great chemistry. It just needed a slight tweak. But overall, this is honestly one of my favorite movies, and much like Thumbelina, it captures the magic that's been missing from a lot of Disney's more recent movies. These films, even the bad ones, make me truly miss 2D animation. Let's hope that Don Bluth eventually gets to release his film version of Dragon's Lair. At least it would give him a chance to end his film career on a better note than Tiny. And it would be nice to see a 2D film in the movie theater again. With computer animation being the dominant animation nowadays, traditional animation has pretty much become an endangered art form that thrives in television and independent projects. However, I'm hoping that there will be someone who will challenge Disney the way Don Bluth did. Yes, that would be difficult, but it's not impossible. After all, they had no competition in animation before Don Bluth, and had he not challenged them to do better, we wouldn't have the Disney Renaissance. We can't let 2D animation die because there's a beauty to it that can't be captured in 3D. If Don Bluth could manage to challenge Disney and force them to do better, who's to say that someone else won't be able to do that as well and revive traditional animation? I refuse to believe that traditional animation will never make a comeback in the mainstream media. It's too powerful to be lost. And those are my rankings for Don Bluth's movies. So what did you guys think? Did you agree with my choices? What are your rankings for the Don Bluth movies? Let me know in the comments. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, especially when I help my channel take off so I can do this a full-time job, which I would really appreciate. If you want to show some extra support, you can send me money through the YouTube Super Thanks. You can also follow me on my other social media accounts in the links below. I'm the Wicked Merman from Under the Sea.